So we just finished watching the show Waco on Netflix, and I want to show you guys this shot that really grabbed my attention and inspired me to create something similar. So I love how they start with the talent being soft focused in the background, while meanwhile in the foreground the dust is being captured and it just looks so beautiful swirling around, and then they rack focus back to our guy in the back. Now I realize that if you're watching this scene out of context of the story, it may not be quite as impactful on you as it was on me, but nonetheless, I just found it fascinating and I wanted to figure out how they did it. And when we were first talking about it, we were like, oh, is the dust CGI'd? And I'm like, no, that can't be it, because when they rack focus to our talent, we still have particles floating in the air. You can see them. So then I was convinced that it was fake dust, and I was researching how to keep powder or something like that, you know, floating in the air, very natural. And then finally it just occurred to me, it's not about the dust at all. It's more about the quality of light. What we have readily available to us nowadays is a lot of soft sources. So I'm sure you have something like some LED panels in your kit, or maybe you even have some RGB tubes like my Pavo Nanlight tubes, and when you turn these on, they just create a big, broad, soft pool of light. There's no sharp definition going on there, but if you take something like a 120D and combine it with a 2x Fresnel, now you have a hard light source. You turn that bad boy on and bingo, you instantly reveal all the particles swirling around in the air. This is akin to how Hollywood productions create big shafts of light. So if you ever seen some shots that look like this, basically what they do, they park a big hard source outside of the window and they blast it through, and then inside the room they turn on a haze machine and the atmosphere reveals the sharp edges of the beams of light. But now with our Waco reference, we're not so interested in revealing the shafts of light, but rather we're more interested in seeing what's inside those shafts of light. So the dust is really the easy part of this entire sequence. We know we just need a hard source, but the tricky part is combining it with the rest of our Hollywood scene. So if we look here at the Waco reference, we notice that when they rack focus to our talent in the background, they are still shooting into the shadow side. There is still depth and contrast ratios happening here. So you could easily pull off the dust shot with, you know, something as simple and inexpensive as a 120D with a 2x Fresnel, but the only thing is, if that was the only tool you were using, when you racked focus to the guy, you wouldn't have that shadow, you wouldn't have those lighting contrast ratios. So how do we go about creating a shot similar to this? Well, first let's study the second portion of the sequence when they rack focus to our talent. Check out the location. What's so cool about this is that even though the actor is parked against the wall like that, they still found a way to build depth in the shot, and they did this by putting him in the corner of the room. So by doing this, the upstage wall is running towards 9 o'clock, while the downstage wall is running towards 4 o'clock. This is what is known as two-point perspective. Two-point perspective is when two lines are running at separate vanishing points. However, in this scenario, it is called inverted two-point perspective because the lines are running toward us rather than away from us. This is all crucial in helping build depth. Next, let's look at the set design. Notice how the walls aren't just a boring white or a modern beige, right? They have texture, they have those little wooded slats, those cutouts, those lines, and plus the color is this rich, dark brown. This is all production design helping to assist the lighting in creating overall mood and tone for the shot. So when I was approaching this, I went about it a little differently for a couple of reasons. The first one being quite simply that Paramount doesn't produce my YouTube videos, so I don't have access to the same crew and the same gear, right? But also, I wasn't too hip on that harsh key light that they were putting on our guy in that Waco reference. And they're doing that for a couple different reasons. One, he's the villain in this scene, right? And also, it is supposed to recreate a sharp, harsh sunbeam, right? I had a different set for obvious reasons, but also Marianne was my talent, and I didn't want to portray her as a villain in my setup. So rather than completely recreating this Waco shot, I just kind of interpreted it as my own. So I went about it knowing that I needed the dust to have its own light source and Marianne to have her own. So essentially I approached this as if the dust was another character in the scene. So first I focused on the setup for the dust. I took the 120D and combined the 2x Fresnel, but then also I threw on a honeycomb grid and some barn doors onto the end of that 2x Fresnel. And the honeycomb grid is mainly just to control the beams of light, make it a little narrow, and then the barn doors are to help control any spill that's contaminating Marianne's shadow side. But it wasn't quite enough, so I had to bring in another flag to help maintain that shadow side of Marianne's face, and it also helped build some nice layers. Then, of course, I needed lots of dust, right? So I took an old sweater of mine and just shook it up within the beam of light to help stir things up. And now the next one was the one that was hard for me, was Marianne's light source. I did put a little bit more work on myself because I chose to go with a soft source versus a hard source, and it's just harder to shape and control soft light versus hard light. But I made a choice early on and I chose to stick with it. I decided for the best soft source was to use my turkey sandwich light. If you're new here and you don't know what that is, I'll put a link down in the description below, but essentially it's just these two Pavo tubes blasting into some white chloroplast. First thing I needed to do was to match the color temperature to my 120D to the Pavo tubes, and I do that with the Light Spectrum app. It was reading roughly about 5300 Kelvin, so I just went over there and dialed that into my Pavo tubes. The next step is to set the right intensity levels on my Pavo tubes. I need to make sure that it's at my shooting stop on the lens, which for this setup I was doing a 2:8 split. Right? So how I do this is I use my little trusty light meter, the Sekonic LiteMaster Pro. I take an incident reading of her upstage side, the side of her face that is away from the camera, and I just dial in that level until I get my 2:8 split. So now I have the intensity right, I have the color temperature right, and the reason for matching the color temperature is because I wanted to portray both of these light sources as one same source, right? But still building those contrast levels, right? So even though it is two sources, we're still tricking the audience because I need to have that shadow side on Marianne's face. But now, just because I have the intensity and the color temperature right from the turkey light, I still gotta control this huge soft pool of light that I've put on her. And the first thing was I brought in two huge sheets of Duvetine negative fill, and I essentially just used those as gigantic barn doors. You'll notice here in the BTS where I just squeeze those in, making that pool of light narrower and narrower, just hitting Marianne. The sheet on the back side is helping take all that level off of the back wall, right? Creating some depth, some layers there. And then I used the big sheet that's on camera side to maintain Marianne's shadow side facing camera. So now I had the spill horizontally controlled. Now all that was left was I had a big pool of vertical spill. So I brought in a little cutter flag, an 18x24, and I flew that in from the top side of the turkey sandwich light and just brought it down right above Marianne's head. And that helped with all that level spilling all over the bookshelf that she was leaning against. And now I had another issue. There was all one level from her forehead down, and I didn't really want that. So I brought in a double net. That's a red net. It brings your light down one full stop, and I just flew that in from the bottom side of the turkey light and just brought it up right under her chin. So now the audience didn't have to search anywhere, you know, because at the top of the scene, they're all involved with the swirling of the dust. You know, I just wanted it being a straight laser beam, boom, knowing right where to look. And I did all that by all of those modifiers using to control that soft source. And this was my final sequence. So again, my interpretation is a little different. One, because I chose to go with a softer key light on our talent for obvious reasons that I've already stated, but also I added some cinematic movement, if you will, because I was using the dolly, whereas in Waco, it was just on sticks. Marianne and I were talking about this, and we're both pretty convinced that the swirling of the dust was something that was completely born on the day of, meaning we don't think anyone sat in any pre-production meeting and talked about swirling dust shots in the storyboards or the shot list. Now, maybe they did, but I don't know, I just don't think they did that. What I'm guessing is that the director and or the DP, you know, they're walking on location the day of, they're setting up the lights, they're lining up the shot, and this is something that they noticed and were inspired in the moment, right? But you're only able to have something like that happen if you're 100% in the moment and being completely aware of your surroundings, taking in the entire location and not being completely married to the shot list or the storyboards, right? And in this case, it just turned out so beautifully because not only does the swirling dust look really cool, but it also just acts as a metaphor to what's happening in the story, because the swirling of the dust just adds so much to the overall mood and tone of the shot. So the biggest takeaway here is stay in tune with your shot and your surroundings, because you never know what could be hidden right in front of you waiting to enhance your shot. Hey, if you're a fan of the channel and like to support, there's a couple different ways you can do that. The first and easiest way is to just hit that subscribe button and be sure to hit the bell so you get the latest videos as soon as they're dropped. But if you want to go above and beyond that and be a part of a daily filmmaking conversation, then I invite you to join the DogTimes community over on Patreon. That is where once a week I release an exclusive members-only video breaking down projects, talking gear, and sharing insider industry tips and tricks, things that I just would never be allowed to release on YouTube. But my favorite part about the Patreon is the conversations happening over on Discord. That is where you will be connected with like-minded filmmakers and have instant access to learning ways to improve your own skills so you feel more confident about working on set as a professional. So welcome to the DogTimes community, and I'll chat with you soon.